When Love Stopped Breathing. Previous episodes are available on playlist, a link is given in the video description. Episode 4. Chapter 33. Her head spun back. She remembered the times she was sad in her apartment as she lay there with a sick sense of contentment, knowing that life was slipping away. It made her cringe now. Then she saw her parents and her kid, who was her heaven, in a blurry way. No matter what, it was a final dream, a trick her mind played on her, or the truth of death. The recollection of it seemed to help her now. She appeared to get a burst of vigor from a remembrance of something that most people would call an illusion. It was like she had found her safe place, and it had given her the uncommon promise of kindness. She had spotted Kellen next to her bed when she woke up, and she had seen Lola, Damien, and Ryan. It was their voices and emotions that brought her back. Dr. Robert remarked, "I hope you're not thinking this is the afterlife." It was hard to tell if he was serious or simply joking. "My last patient did that after I punched him out of a coma. It was funny until he begged for mercy." "My head feels scary," Lena said. "Yes, it is," Dr. Robert responded in response. Then he asked her about her health, memory, and some light motions of her fingers and toes. He was busy writing things down on pieces of paper on a clipboard. After Dr. Robert was happy and departed with his troop, Selene came in and has been threatening and angry with Lena ever since. Lola hit Lena on the arm again and said, "You're bad. You're really bad." Lena murmured, "Ow," when Lola hit her on purpose with a mild blow. Lola's nose was stained from the few tears she had shed after going in. "How dare you pull this stunt?" "No, for not pulling any stunt," she said. "It was like the nasty Grim Reaper came for you, and you served yourself on a silver platter. Is this what you've learned from me after so many months of being friends?" "Not done, Lena, not done at all." Lena groaned and shut her eyes for a while out of shame and regret. "I always choose the easier ways out, don't I? By now, it would have been a universal fact." Lola huffed and made her mouth into a narrow line. She didn't say anything for a long time before she spoke again. "And that's why Dr. Robert has you in counseling. Apparently, girl, you're a sad puppy that needs some weird person for," she said, twisting her hands about. "Training for the potty." Lena's mouth turned into a faint but happy smile. Her arms and legs felt heavy because of all the medications that were being forced into her body, yet she still took the time to pat Selene's hand, which was on the bed. "You talk dirty, Lola, and I'm glad you do." Lola's face seemed angry until she heard Lena say it. Then, the corner of her mouth turned into a crooked smile. Lena started to doze off again as the weight of her brush with death began to wear her down. After that, she went outside for a few hours, maybe longer, and fell into a deep, colorless sleep. She heard them talking about the revelation at the party and Selene from a distance and once quite clearly. When she finally woke up fully, she put the pieces together. In the empty, peaceful hospital room, she lay alone and let out a deep sigh of relief. But she knew she had missed a really dramatic show. Ryan arrived in just as the nurse was leaving after giving her the first dosage of medicine for the day. At that point, Lena was feeling a lot better. Still sleepy but better and certainly awake. "So, it was Selene all along, hey?" Her voice sounded hoarse. She took a nervous breath and then closed her eyes for a time. Ryan nodded. Now she's safely in police custody and will be waiting for the day when she'll be in court, he said with an angry grunt at the end. I made sure of it. How could one lady have so much poison? Lena thought about it with revulsion. Selene was ill. She had stolen her baby away from her and made her life a terrible nightmare. And now Lena would make sure that Selene was punished for what she had done wrong. Ryan added that the police would collect her statement and that she would have to be in court. Lena was excited. Lena's eyes hurt, but she was able to keep the tears from falling. She didn't think Dr. Robert had mixed in any antidepressants, so it might have been the pills or the strange new vigor she felt inside her after this near-death experience. The news that Kellen finally believed the truth made her feel a lot better, but she realized that was all she felt. She was glad with the change, although it wasn't anything special. The fact was that she didn't know how she should feel about it. I leave for a few days, and this is what happens. You scared me, Lena, Damien said with a sad look on his face as he sat on the stool next to her bed. Think about how I felt when I heard from Lola and how she told me in great detail how you came back from the dead. Lena bit her lip. As each of her friends came to see her, the guilt in her became worse. Damien he stopped her off, as if he couldn't hear her, and said, and to hear that you didn't call for help on purpose while you were. Finally, her eyes filled up. I'm so sorry. I know I'm a bad person. I should have been grateful for the friends I have who are so dedicated to me and help me more than they need to. But what do I do in return? I look for the easiest ways to get away instead of standing up and fighting. Damien took a deep breath and ran his fingers through his hair. You need to know, Lena, that you'll always have me us, he said, pausing for a while before continuing. Things aren't as bad as you think they are. There is light, but you don't want to see it. Lena didn't say anything and sighed in relief as Damien bent over her on the bed and gave her a side hug. Damien sat still, tired of the lines that were stuck to her hands and the gauze that wrapped her head. That hug was a touch strange, but if anybody could make strange feel great, it had to be Damien. He really picked her up off the street and didn't simply drop her off at the hospital and be done with his 10 seconds of generosity. He went above and above to assist her to start a new life in a new city. Damien had really saved her life. Did they really shave off all my hair? Lena murmured a little bit later. Damien looked sorrowful when he lifted his head up. Don't worry, they'll grow back. Lena forced a grin and said, will they grow back blue? She thought of a youngster named Dalla. She thought about whether or not she was still in the hospital. If she was, Lena may come to see her. Damien raised an eyebrow in disbelief. I guess the pills are talking. Yes, the blue ones, Lena said, and her body shook with laughter. But then she moaned and stopped talking because it made the awful numbness in her brain feel strange. Damien kept frowning, but he was careful. Lena basically slept during the day that went by. And whenever she woke up, one of her pals was always sitting next to her and watching her like a hawk. After a lot of poking and prodding, Dr. Robert said she could move to a room since she was healthy enough. Her 3 pals yelled from the door. Selene wrapped her slender arms around Damien and Ryan on either side of her and pulled them down to her height for a group hug. Damien and Ryan choked as their necks were squeezed. Lena smiled back at the nurse and watched as she put a new bag of saline on the stand and some medications on the bedside table. The nurse told Lena that they would change the bandage on her head in an hour and then leave. Lena moved her body a little from her slightly propped up bed. She grinned to herself as she looked at her pals, who were all snoozing. Damien was in the center with his lips open a little and his head leaning back on the backrest. Damien had Ryan and Lola's heads on his shoulders from both sides. Lola drooling on Damien's shirt was funny. Lena let out a sigh. She begged them to go home now that she was said to be fully okay. But no one paid attention to her. Lena felt even more guilty because of how much they cared about her. The sensation of belonging that was starting to take over everything else in her heart was also growing. The sound of the door opening drew her attention away from her sleeping buddies. She was having trouble moving her head quickly, so it took her a long time to turn her head toward the entrance. Celeste strolled in carefully. Lena's breath stopped for a second there. She remembered the last time she saw the woman. During their final chat, the once motherly woman appeared like nothing more than a cruel enemy. Celeste looked uneasy as she stood next to Lena's bed, unsure of what to do. She was right next to the stool, but it looked like she didn't know if she should sit down. They were quiet for a long time, and the only sound was the constant snoring in the background. Celeste looked up at the couch and then back at Lena. "Ah," she said with a stammer. "The nurse told me that you're okay now." Lena wasn't sure if someone was asking her about her health or telling her about it. "Yes," she said, and that was enough for her. A few more seconds of stillness went by before Celeste eventually sat down on the stool, looking strangely tired. "Lena, I know how I've treated you, how we've treated you, I and Kellen. It was so utterly awful. I can't explain how much I'm regretting it all. And I can see how Alexis is devastated with remorse. It was a conspiracy well planned, it was a misunderstanding all right, but we should have given you at least the benefit of the doubt." Lena was peaceful and calm. But her heart was another story. It was a good thing that she had been taken off the heart monitor a while ago, since she could really feel it pounding inside her chest. "I know I'm asking a lot of you," Celeste said, her eyes filling with real sadness. "And I'm sorry for asking you this, Lena. But can you ever forgive me? Can you ever forgive Kellen?" Celeste nearly begged Lena to be motionless and silent, sniffling. She murmured, "Even God forgives a sinner," as she twisted her hands. Of course. Lena knew that Celeste was quite devout in a traditional way. The woman had never missed a Sunday church, and she had fasted every day throughout Lent, no matter what. So, it wasn't strange that God became involved in this mess. Lena could now see why Celeste was so rigorous with her religion. She was terrified. It wasn't a horrible thing, but it couldn't be the finest thing either. Lena responded, "But I'm not God. I'm just Lena." She didn't have the strength to do what was being demanded of her just now. And since she woke up, she had learned that she had a long way to go and that she needed to forgive herself first for the wrongs she knew she had done to herself and to the others who had put up with her messed up, depressed self for so long. Celeste nodded in agreement, even though tears were flowing down her cheeks. Lena's gaze abruptly moved over Celeste's head, and when she saw the sad figure standing at the half-open door, she froze. She thought it was Kellen, but at the same time, she didn't. Kellen stood there looking at Lena through the half-open door. He felt his pulse race when he saw how pale she still was. Her skin hue was virtually the same as the bandage over her head and the blankets that were drawn up to her chest. He saw that she was too slender. Her cheekbones had sunk in a little, and her eyes looked tired. He stood there watching, listening, and hoping against all hope while his mother chatted to Lena. He looked at her with desire and then with sorrow. At that moment, all he wanted was to hold her tightly and never let her go. But he was aware that it wasn't that simple. It would never be simple. Kellen had to bite the inside of his cheek when Celeste spoke the word God. He shook his head in his mind at that. But I'm not God. I'm just Lena. Hearing her made his breath catch in his throat. She was only Lena, and she meant everything to him. He tensed as her eyes met his after a time. He was too scared to let out the air he had been holding when she saw him. Celeste said something quietly to Lena and patted her hand. Then she turned around to go. As she walked past him, she gazed at him for a moment. It was just a sad, empty sight. There was a profound feeling of sadness. When he stepped in carefully, taking slow steps, Lena had glanced away. He knew she was still quite aware of him, even if she was just looking up at the ceiling. He could tell, maybe because her shoulders grew stiff or because her hands curled around a clutch of the bed sheet. Lena, he mumbled in dread, holding on to the small amount of hope that was still alive in him. The hope that she would forgive him and that he would be able to hold his world in his arms again. But suddenly, that last amount of optimism he had started to fade. His finger came out to brush her cheek because he was greedy and couldn't help himself. Lena took a deep breath and shifted her face to the other side, as if just seeing him bothered her or touching him would burn her. And he knew that there was nothing unexpected about how much she hated him. It hurt his soul. He had said and done enough to get her to this point, which was far away from him. Was there any way to take back anything he had said? Was there a way to take back what he had done? He pulled his hand back and pushed it into his hair. One tear fell from his eye. Lena, he croaked, hoping against hope that things might be fixed somehow. I'm so sorry, please go, Lena said, cutting in and breathing hard. Her face was still turned away from him, and her voice was so low that it seemed like she was trying to hold back a sigh. His stomach turned. He sat down on the stool and grasped her hand with both of his, like a dying man holding on to what was keeping him alive. Please, Lena. Her fingers moved about in his palms as she weakly tried to pull away from him. And then she immediately relaxed. She blinked a lot with tears in her eyes that she didn't spill. She still didn't look at him. She was still stiff since he was there. I can't, she continued, and this time, her voice sounded terrified and urgent. You need to know that I can't. Please go. He felt like all of his power, hope, and light had left his heart. She slipped out of his fists like sand when he released his grip. She let out a shattering sigh only when she heard him go. She diverted her eyes to the sofa where Ryan, Damien, and Lola had been sleeping because the stillness seemed wrong. She was the only one who knew that they were no longer sleeping and were now awake and looked at her with blank looks on their faces. Lena moaned. What? Lola snorted. You could have done better. Better. Yeah, just punch him in the nose and get it over with. But I know you're probably feeling weak from the surgery and all the medicine. In that case, we can sneak up on Kellen later, and you can punch him then." Ryan instantly started stroking his own jaw like he was thinking of a punch that a certain woman had given him in the past. Lena sat silent as her pals fought over how to throw punches and how to do it so that the other person would be hurt a lot. She lost her focus. She thought about Kellen again. She couldn't stop thinking about the sorrow in his eyes and the shame and regret she had seen there in those brief minutes. She had turned aside because she was afraid she would get weak. It was because she used to adore him. She loved him so much that when he pushed her away, it broke her heart in the worst manner conceivable. Her heart was still crushed inside her chest, and the cruel feeling of love hurt. She was afraid that if she looked at his eyes again, she would become putty in his hands again, and she couldn't let that happen. How much she loved Kellen was all-consuming, and one day, it would destroy her. It was a terrifying place. She didn't want to go back there. She didn't want to have to think about just one person all the time. She knew and could easily see that Kellen was just as much a victim of Selini's plan as she was. But it wasn't Selini who had put those cruel, degrading words in his mouth. He had been talking the whole time. Selini had been in charge, and Kellen had readily let her. They had set the fire to burn Lena, but she was embarrassed that it had been so easy for her. Even though his apology seemed real, she couldn't bring herself to talk about the hurtful past and let him off the hook. Not yet. Until she could find herself again. Even though it made sense for her to forgive Kellen now that he was feeling guilty, her heart had already created the barricades. How could she not think about the darkest times in her life when she looked at Kellen? There was no way that could happen. Lena let out a sigh. And only then did she realize that her temples were damp with tears that had not been heard. She wiped them away because she was afraid the other 3 people in the room would see. They were sick of watching her weep, and after the previous time, she didn't want them to see her cry again. She was mortified that people would believe she was the weakest of all weaklings, even though she hadn't done anything to show them wrong. But as she took her hand away from her face and looked up, she saw that Damien was looking at her very closely. When she bit her bottom lip, he grinned just a little and gazed at her knowingly as if he knew she was shy of being discovered. Ryan and Lola were too busy arguing over the extremely bad subject of correct punching techniques to notice. Damien was nice, but Lena knew that the other 2 would have hit her hard on her already broken head. Lena was able to obtain her promised guards to go home, clean up, and have a good meal after a few hours. They had agreed, but they had also made it clear that at least one of them would always be with her. Ryan had volunteered for the first round, but Lola had given him a warning scowl before she departed with Damien. Ryan said a minute later, "That woman is crazy," as he pressed a button on the bed's remote to raise the upper half of the bed. Lena grumbled in satisfaction since she was sitting in a more comfortable posture. Her back felt better. "I know, but I wouldn't change it for anything. The world needs more crazy people like her." Ryan didn't say anything. He proceeded to give her the tablet the nurse had told him to give her half an hour before lunch. Lena saw Ryan moving his feet as she took it down with a drink of water. He seemed a bit tired. "You want to say something to me?" He groaned in defeat and said, "No, yes." Lena turned her head to the side and waited. Whatever it was, she could tell it was bad. Earlier, you and Kellen." He stopped for a second, seeming displeased, and Lena froze. "He said he was sorry and all that. Are you going to forgive him, Lena? After everything he did?" Lena spoke out after a lengthy pause. "Ryan, first tell me if you can forgive me for what I did." "What will I forgive you for?" Ryan's forehead crinkled in a grimace of complete uncertainty. "Because I don't trust you," she said with a sigh. "I went to yours that night after," she said, stopping for a moment since she didn't want to talk about the terrible thing that happened again. Ryan nodded, and his scowl went away, but a shadow of melancholy swiftly took its place. "I know. I saw the pictures. I heard you talk on the phone. I heard half of what you said, and I thought the worst," she said, her voice breaking for a second. "I heard about the gift you sent and how excited you were that Kellen would get jealous. I thought you were the one who stabbed me in the back. Even though we have been friends for a long time, I believe you sent those photos. And I left. Can you forgive me for that?" Ryan was shocked. He recovered his voice, what felt like hours later, although it was only a few minutes. "It's not the same, Lena," he murmured quietly, glancing down at his hands. "Isn't it?" Lena questioned in the same way. They both looked out the window that was open across the room. For a long time, they didn't say anything. Ryan finally said, "Well, I guess I'm a hypocrite, Lena." He thought for a moment before speaking again. "Selene made a forest fire through Kellen, and I could be a source of fuel for it. It's a global truth that Kellen was possessive and insecure about you, even though he always acted confident. I'm ashamed and guilty that I used to enjoy seeing him burn with jealousy when he saw me with you. Sometimes, I did it on purpose. I was so used to getting a good laugh when he acted like a madman and took you away from me. It was funny until it wasn't anymore." Lena sat still. After that, Ryan didn't say anything for a long time. At one time, the stillness was too much for him, and he said her name. "Lena, all of us are imperfect freaks, aren't we?" She kept her eyes on the window, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Ryan agreed, "We are. And when we break things, they can be fixed, but they'll never be the same again," Lena added with a smile as she turned to Ryan again. It was one of those times when invisible spirits cried amen from all around. Ryan used to be Lena's best buddy. But when tragedy struck like a ninja, the bond fell apart, and the gap increased. Ryan came back, and their relationship grew anew, yet the past was still there. Ryan had to share the location he thought was only for him. With Lola and Damien. She had always loved Kellen, but so much had happened by this point that even forgiving him would never make things the same again. The pace has been broken a long time ago. It was time for the new, too. When Kellen walked back out of the room, it felt like death would have been better than this. He left, just like Lena desired, and didn't stop until he got to the small botanical garden on the side of the floor. He sat down on the seat next to a long line of Laelia orchids and put his head in his quivering hands. Kellen was completely unaware of the beauty and scent around him, unlike a few pregnant ladies and an old man in a wheelchair who was paralyzed. His palms were damp on his cheek. He understood that they had gathered his tears. His breath caught as he thought back to what had just happened. He couldn't help but think about how Lena would have felt when he pushed her face away from her begging eyes that night. If possible, his remorse simply grew, and he was afraid that this pain would never end. Because if it didn't, it was extremely likely that one day, all he would have left in his life would be this pain. He was afraid. He felt afraid, like a youngster who had lost their way. The thought that no one may locate him made it even worse. He had lost his world and had nowhere else to go. As the minutes went by, he slowly became aware of what was going on around him. A couple that was expecting was talking quietly to their child on the opposite side of the orchids. This was the most peaceful vista there was. Kellen could sense the excitement, happiness, and love in their voices. He felt like he had lost everything, and it was like another horrible nail in his heart. There was a flash of lightning in the sky, and then there was a loud boom of thunder. Kellen heard the man on the other side of the orchids laugh and remark, "That's Felden. You never know when the cloud will take the sky." The woman's voice laughed, too. "Come on, let's go inside before our little one kicks me in the face because she's scared of thunder." Like mother, like daughter. The pair who couldn't be seen departed, and the woman was out of breath. Then the rain started. Others, too, fled in a rush. Some, though, kept close to the double doors under the shed. Only Kellen stayed where he was, looking up at the icy drops of heaven. He let the rain fall along with his agony. Lola laughed behind Lena for the fourth time as she pushed the wheelchair down the hall. Lena rolled her eyes or tried really hard to do it. "Pushing this damned thing makes me feel like I'm at the store." "But there's a person inside the cart," Lola said. Ryan and Damien had gone home, so it was Lola's time to take care of Lena. And she was turning out to be a really eager babysitter. With Lena's life danger out of the way, Lola was able to focus on all the fun things at the hospital. Finding Dana at the hospital wasn't hard. The nurse at the counter helped with it. Lena toyed with the petals of the baby pink flowers on her lap as Lola recounted how the nurse told her to push the wheelchair into Dana's room. The sky blue thin ribbons that held the cluster of flowers together looked great with the pink. "This color looks good on you, Lola. Did you get these from the flower shop across the street?" "Yes, that's the shop. They have an amazing selection of flowers, you know," Lola said with a smile. "And their business is doing well, the line of customers was this long. It was a smart move to open the shop right next to a hospital. It was a sure thing that it would be a success." Damien picked out the color, ribbons, and roses, or I was very interested in buying the Dracula Simia orchids. Dracula orchids. Yeah, looked like the faces of Count Dracula were pasted on each one of them. "That's interesting. I almost bought them." Lena was glad that Damien stopped it from happening. Dracula whatever orchids didn't seem like the right flowers to give to a 4 or 5-year-old with cancer. When they got to Dana's room, Lena didn't see what she thought she would see. Dana's weak body was lying on the hospital bed. Her face appeared dried out, and her eyes were buried deep into what seemed like enormous pain. She looked sickly pale, but as she glanced up at Lena, her eyes lit up like nothing was wrong. Her energy was as bright as a new day. "It's you!" Dana tried to scream, but all that came out was a shaky voice. "They took your hail too?" Lena grinned. "Yes, I guess they did." Her head was still bandaged, but it was clear that there was nothing but pierced skin behind it. There was a teddy bear on one side of the bed, and on the other side, a couple who seemed worried sat on a chair and a stool. It wasn't hard to figure out that they were Dana's parents. It took Dana a good several minutes to introduce them to Lena. She even pointed to the bump on the sofa that was covered by a thin blanket. "That's my brother, Lanky. It's Tony," Dana's dad said, gazing at Lena and then beaming down at his daughter. "Yes, that too," Dana said, brushing off the correction like it didn't matter. "Miss Lena, he's magical. The doctor said that Lanky has magic stuff inside the long bone in his back, and some of it he's going to give me so that my illness goes away. Do you like those flowers? I love pink." Lena noticed that she was still sitting there with the roses on her lap. Lola helped Lena lean over a little so she could give them to Dana, who smiled with tired, half-closed eyes. This poor little girl, who had just started her life, was going through something that broke my heart. Lena sometimes thought about what God's point was. Some individuals have a hard time from the very beginning of their life, while others are showered with happiness and pleasure all the way through. How does heaven know who to offer what? Some individuals are born without arms or legs, while some are born with a lot of money, power, and comfort. How does this system really work? A little while later, Lena and Lola stepped out of the room, and Dana's mother, Bella, followed them. In the hallway, they halted in front of the door. Bella said, "She's getting worse. Apparently, chemo isn't working anymore. The doctors said that a bone marrow transplant is the only option left now," she began, then stopped to sigh. "Thank goodness my older son was the best match of all our family members." Lena could hear the terror in Bella's voice. It was the worst kind of motherly anxiety. Lena could feel the fear since she had lost a child before. "Don't worry. Everything will be fine. All of our prayers are with her." Bella wiped the shine out of her eyes and smiled as she nodded. At that time, Lola chose to hit Lena on the shoulder. "Or if something goes wrong, call us. We've gotten pretty good at scaring death away. For example, we have a resurrection case here, see?" "Resurrection case?" Bella looked confused, and Lena pushed her lips together tightly. Lena was worried that Lola would be able to accomplish the exact opposite of everything Lena was trying to do to make things better. Lena added, "It's a dramatic story, actually. Let's not talk about this." When a fight broke out at the nurse's counter at the end of the hall, the issue was quickly dropped. The speakers yelled, "Code Blue!" The three ladies stood back and watched as nurses and physicians rushed in and out of the room adjacent to Dana's. They stormed left a little while later, pushing a bed and a patient who was having a seizure in the worst way possible. "It's a teenager who tried to kill himself several times. I heard the nurses talking about it," Bella said as the noise died down. "It's awful how some people fight tooth and nail to stay alive while others are so desperate to end it. Fate is a cruel joke, and it's not fair." Lena's brows came together in profound thinking and agreement that made her cringe. In the evening, you could hear clouds crying in the distance. The darkness that came after sunset and the shadows of a storm that was slowly coming made it look like it was the late hours of the night. Damien looked out the window, then shut it tightly when a chilly breeze hit his face. He complained and wiped his face with his fingers to get rid of the little drops of water that the wind had brought with it. The light rain before was just a warm-up. Now the storm is here. Lena moved the spoon in a circle inside the mild soup that was her dinner. You have to finish the whole thing, Damien said as he sat back down on the stool. I don't think I can take any more of this, she said, making a face and looking up to find Damien frowning at her. His face was serious as he replied, You said the same thing at lunch. At this rate, you'll leave this hospital as a living skeleton. Lena attempted to seem serious, but in the end, the corner of her mouth turned up into a grin. The picture in my head is interesting. Damien lifted a brow. That's it. You're going to finish that soup. Lena was upset and placed a mouthful of the tasteless liquid in her mouth. She looked to be putting forth a lot of effort as she swallowed it down, holding her breath the whole time. Damien replied, I've made a decision about something, Lena. He rolled his thumbs around each other and seemed a bit uncertain. I want to run my boutiques on my own more. Aren't you already running the business on your own? Lena said as she chewed on what tasted like mushy carrots. Yes, but not completely. I mean, I buy things from top designers and fashion companies. The whole Kellen case that now makes me want to depend on no one but the people I can trust, he said as he ruffled his hair and let out a breath while trying to find the right words to say what he felt. I want to rebuild my business from the ground up so that it can stand on its own. What are you trying to say? She now understood what Damien meant. But that also meant that more questions came up. We're not just going to sell clothes, we're also going to make them. A lightning bolt hit someplace. Lena stopped. It was a really strange thought. And that was going to be a big risk. Damien groaned, I know, but he smiled nevertheless at Lena's stillness. It sounds scary. Lena nodded and said, It does. But let's remember that most of my workers are already very good at making things by hand. For example, Macy from our other branch gave us knitted sweaters for Christmas, and Vienna showed us the lace and beads nightgown she made. Lena picked up from there, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Even our Lola can sew designs over shawls. The boring batch we got last month? She was the one who kept those shawls lively by sewing intricate patterns all over them. They sold like antiques. Damien's smile was full of joy. That's what I'm talking about. But we still need more workers. We could even hire students who are interested in fashion design and sewing. Making things by hand can also be very profitable. Damien's smile became even wider as he looked down. And I see that there's no more of that awful soup. Lena looked down, and there was really nothing left in the dish. She let out a wheezy laugh that delighted her. She didn't even know it. It's very strange how things can be so easy when you're among other individuals. A lot of different sorts and colors of flowers filled one corner of Lena's room, making her feel like she was in a garden. There were baskets of fruit and packages of chocolate on the table, and Lola gleefully ate them every time someone left. The amount of people who were rushing to the hospital to see Lena was too much. Her co-workers from the store had been by in the morning, and their real concern for her and warmth made her feel good. But what really made her heart skip a few beats with joy and excitement was when Mother Gwen walked in with a babbling Dave in her arms. She was also with two of their sisters and a few other kids who had become very close to Lena and were desperate to see her because they heard she was sick. Hey there, little one. Lena said softly but swiftly, removing Dave from Gwen. Gwen remarked, I thought you would love to see him. Lena agreed with the youngster, you thought absolutely right. She didn't turn away from Dave as the boy held on to her hospital gown as soon as she picked him up. His happy eyes looked up and landed on Lena's face with a look of awe. Lena exhaled and closed her eyes for a moment in happiness. There was no question about it. Dave made her feel whole, but only if she could have him forever and feel this way forever. Lola's voice flowed across the room as she laughed in astonishment and love. There, Lena's got her favorite boy. She rested her temple on Dave's head and gazed across at Lola. She couldn't help but grin a little when she saw Lola giving chocolates to the youngsters who arrived with the sisters. Of course, they didn't say no. They shyly collected a handful of their favorite stuff and strolled up to Lena's bed. And then, right once, people started asking her about the bandage on her head and when her bad fever would go away. Lena addressed their questions with compassion and chuckled when they were unsure. Their foreheads would become charming tiny frowns. Being with kids can really heal them and bring them back to life in a way that medication can't. Lena felt better as Mother Gwen left with her battalion, promising to come back the next day. It was hard for her to say goodbye to Dave, but she told herself that she would see him again soon. She still had little possibility of adopting Dave since she was sick. But she didn't let her dream die yet. A lot of the time, miracles happen. Lola said that the fact that she was a resurrection case was the best proof ever, right? She wasn't the first one who came back to life after being flatlining for a long time, but since it was her life, her extremely scary life, it seemed like a unique miracle. Lena had been having bad luck for so long that she was used to receiving the burnt side of the cake most of the time. So now, even the smallest piece of luck made her freeze in astonishment. There was another notion that often made her stop in her tracks. She wasn't sure what to make of it. It was more like a part of her existence that she was starting to understand she couldn't put off for long. She would have to deal with Kellen at some point. But her mixed feelings made her want that time to arrive later. But knowing that person was always waiting outside her room didn't help at all. The nurse had been telling Lena things like an enthusiastic spy. After that day, Kellen didn't try to get inside her room again when she didn't want to talk to him. Instead, he came every day and sat outside her room during visiting hours, which annoyed Lola and Ryan. Lena noted, nevertheless, that Damien had become indifferent to Kellen's presence for some reason. Lena wanted to talk to Damien and find out what was wrong if anything, but Damien always opted to ignore Kellen, who was a difficult topic for some reason. Then, she would change the subject to make things more comfortable again. She had just finished her boring lunch that afternoon and was proud of herself for not throwing up once. At that point, the nurse came in with a bouquet of calla lilies and sparkling eyes. "Look," the nurse said, dropping her voice as if she were telling a secret. She pointed to the bouquet and said, "The guy who sits outside your room every day asked me to give this to you. But I know you don't like him, so if you don't want to keep it, I'll just go back and give it back to him." Kellen. Lena let out a low sigh. She remembered the days when he used to bring her this similar flower. Those were beautiful, love-filled days. Kellen used to tell her that she was as pretty as flowers. Easy and straightforward. Kellen liked things simple, and maybe that's why he lost his cool so quickly when things got difficult. Lena's recollections were broken by the door's loud noise as it moved. Damien stood at the doorway with his hands securely gripped behind his back. And it looked like he understood what the nurse had said. He took a deep breath and smiled at Lena after looking at the flowers that were still in the nurse's hand for a long time. "Why are you still standing there?" Lena said with a smile. "Come in." Damien was the next person to stay with her. And she had been so thrilled about discussing arrangements with him for their shop's new business that she couldn't sleep. But Damien started to change his mind, which confused her. She saw that his hands were still behind him. He responded quickly, "I'll be back in a minute," and his smile faded a little. "I just remembered that I have to call someone." Lena scowled as he went away without turning his back to her. She thought he was hiding something in his hands behind him on purpose. Strange. Lena turned to gaze at the nurse when she cleared her throat. She waved the bunch of flowers. Lena moaned since she didn't know what to do with them. Kellen may get the wrong idea if she kept them, and if she didn't, he would definitely be wounded. She realized she had to confront him and have that chat to put an end to the issue once and for all. But the truth was that she still wasn't ready. To face Kellen would mean addressing her marriage, her emotions, and everything else that was and wasn't in between. Lena sighed and looked back up at the nurse, who had been waiting for her response patiently. "Please give them back to him," she pleaded. "And tell him not to bring me anything else, especially not lilies." The nurse smiled and nodded to show she understood. "Should I throw them at his face to make it worse?" Lena lifted an eyebrow. "No. Just giving them back would be fine." "Thanks." Lena fell back into bed and closed her eyes as the nurse departed, and the door clicked shut behind her. She knew she would have to open her eyes soon, if not right away. But Lena still wasn't sure if she was ready a week later. Kellen thankfully heard her plea and didn't bring her any more flowers or anything. He would still sit outside her door, though. The nurse always kept her up to date on the situation and asked her if she wanted to call security and keep the man out of the hospital for good. Of course, Lena said no. The trouble was, even though Kellen had wounded her a lot, she still couldn't harm him back. Especially after hearing how much anguish and remorse he was in when he came into her room that day and she turned her face away from him. How could she damage someone who was already in so much pain? Also, her very devoted friends had already said and done a lot, and it was all rather over the top from what she had heard. Lena was afraid that if she added more to it, she would turn into the type of cruel person that she would eventually hate herself for becoming. At first, Damien smiled, but then it turned into a big grin. Lena could finally go home. It seemed like forever before Dr. Robert said it. Ryan, who was next to Damien, hit him on the back too hard in happiness, and Lola, who was on the other side, screamed in his ear. Lena seemed happy, and that made Damien smile even more. The poor woman had to eat the terrible hospital cuisine for a long time. Damien had made some chicken soup at home following his mother's recipe and tried to smuggle it in one day, but the security caught him red-handed, and it was a sad failure. Lola responded, "Pal, you should have told me. I'm the best at getting things past the toughest security." "Mostly," Damien had said with optimism, "do you think you can get the broth inside?" Of course. Just pour the broth into 2 small soup containers, please. And please lend me your credit card so I can go to the nearest lingerie store quickly. Damien's eyebrows came together in uncertainty, but then he realized what was going on and was horrified. He stared down at Lola's chest, and then he looked up again to see her nod with total sincerity. Damien, of course, said no. But back to the happy present, now that Lena was heading home, he could finally utilize his mother's special recipes to make meals for Lena that would hopefully make her smile instead of gagging. The following 2 hours were spent paying off debts and getting the discharge paperwork ready. Damien had a hard time since he had to witness Kellen's sad expression the whole time. Kellen had written his name all over the documents while Lena was in the hospital. He had also signed the papers for the procedure. So he had to sign the discharge papers also so that Lena could go home. Damien stopped Kellen from taking out his credit card. You don't need to spend any more money. Lena wouldn't like it, he said in a forceful voice so that Kellen realized how important this was to Lena and him. She was actually talking about giving you back the money you've spent on her during her admission and surgery. He observed Kellen's fingers go tighter around the credit card, and more lines form on his forehead. The guy looked like he had aged 10 years in only a few weeks. She doesn't have to give the money back. Damien nodded his head. But she wants to. Don't worry, she's not broke. She's been working and has her own savings. Dr. Robert also signed her up for a special program that helps middle-class cancer patients pay for their treatments, which are very expensive. Damien quickly paid the amount specified while Kellen's credit card lingered over the billing counter. Damien gave the person at the other side of the counter Lena's next month's advance payment from the boutique, just like Lena had asked him to. Damien kept telling Lena to pay the bills, but Lena was quite clear that she didn't want to take money from anyone. At first, he was angry with her for being so stubborn, but he couldn't help but appreciate how much she wanted to be free. He didn't understand why she looked at herself like she was ashamed of being the weakest person in the world when he saw her every day getting back up no matter how many times life knocked her down. Lena would say that he took her up off the street and gave her a new life, but she didn't understand how she had worked day and night to establish her own world and make his business a success. Give her some time to heal, Kellen, he said firmly. Kellen stopped in his tracks and turned to Damien, who thought that Kellen was going to his guard post outside Lena's door. I know she needs to talk to you. No matter how much I or any of her friends don't want her to, it's going to happen. But now is not the right time. I guess you already know that, don't you? He saw Kellen's tense shoulders drop as if the guy was completely defeated. Kellen said after a period of silence, with his back still to Damien, I don't want to hurt her more than I already have, but I can't live without her either. Damien let out a sigh. It's more about what she wants. He wanted her to remain away from Kellen, though. He didn't want her to go back to him. He hated Kellen just as much as Ryan and Lola did. But if Lena wanted things to be different, who was he or anyone else to get involved? He figured it out a few days earlier when he went into Lena's room to give her a rose. Lola told him how happy Lena was that he selected those pink flowers for the Dana baby, and he felt Lena would appreciate it if he got her one, too. But then he came in with the rose behind his back and heard the nurse say how lovely the lilies were as she held them up to Lena. Damien didn't know why, but he felt uneasy when he saw Lena's eyes widen as she gazed at the flowers. All of a sudden, one pink rose didn't seem like enough. He did what he believed was best at the time. He smiled, made an excuse, and then walked out of the room. What a great way to leave! It was a routine procedure for a patient to be taken out of the hospital and put in a wheelchair. So, even though Lena could walk now, medical workers were wheeling her out. Damien was already in his car in the driveway, resting against it and waiting for her to show up. He could tell that Kellen had taken his advice seriously and stayed away from Lena. He relaxed a little because he knew there wouldn't be any drama for a while. When he finally saw Lena come out the door, he jumped up and reached her with a big leap. At that moment, he felt like a joyful mountain goat and begged that Ryan and Lola, who were all over Lena, didn't think he was ridiculous. Lena leaned back and laughed as he placed his hand over her shoulders to lift her up and take her to the car. "You know I can walk. Those strong drugs aren't in my system right now, so I can't spin out of control," she remarked with a laugh. "I know," he said, but he still took her up in his arms. "Don't look so angry. This is just a normal part of the process." Ryan and Lola followed Lena, who merely rolled her eyes. For some reason, they were once again in the middle of a furious quarrel. People who saw them would think they were meant to fight one another. As Damien put on the seat belt, Lena, Ryan, and Lola said farewell. They all kissed Lena on the cheek, gave her advice that had previously been given many times, and made threats that showed how much they cared every time. Ryan was going to head back to his hotel and get ready for his flight out of Felden. Back in South Hills, his house and company were waiting for him. "I know you've chosen to live in Felden, Lena, but I hope you'll come to see me often. Will you?" Lena's face looked far away for a second before she blinked it away. "Someday I'll." Ryan smiled for a moment since she didn't dispute it. "I'll, too," Lola said, glancing at her nails. "I'm really interested in seeing where Lena grew up and all that," Ryan puffed and looked blank. "Apparently, no one invited you, woman." Lola laughed. "Nobody owns South Hills. I can go to the city whenever I want. Now take me home. My place is at the intersection, just 2 blocks before your fancy, gold-plated hotel." Damien shook his head in fake anger, and Lena and he shared a funny glance. But it didn't take long for them to start fighting with each other. Lena answered firmly, "No, Dammy, I'm not staying at your place. I can take care of myself just fine now. Dr. Robert wouldn't have let me go home from the hospital otherwise. With the warning that you're going to take it easy for some days before they start with radiotherapy. The entire body of your tumor could not be removed in the surgery. Have you forgotten already?" Lena huffed and poked the edge of the bandana that was tied around her head. "There's only a little bit of the tumor left, which can be just as deadly as before if you give it time and keep being so stubborn," Damien said angrily, but Lena turned away, and he pinched the tip of his nose as he saw her pout. "Okay," he murmured after a time, getting back to his calm state. "I'll take you to your apartment." He could tell that Lena was surprised that he was so easily swayed, but then she grinned at him because she knew she had won. If only she knew. Lena's eyebrows wrinkled in uncertainty. "Damien? Why are you back again?" she said, her voice trailing off as her eyes finally found the baggage he had brought with him. Damien smiled and smirked as he moved by her and into the flat. "Since you wouldn't stay at my place, I decided to stay at yours." Lena's mouth dropped wide and stayed that way as she turned around to see Damien walking away from her house. "I can't believe it." Damien had just dropped her off and didn't ask her to stay at his house again. He also carried her all the way up and didn't let her go until she was comfortable sitting on the couch in her living room. Lena had to admit that it was strange that he departed without saying goodbye in the usual way when he would have informed her over and over how to take care of herself, about medicines, and how to phone him if anything went wrong. She should have understood that the man had a plan. "Damien," she yelled, not believing it. Her feet, which were tired, followed him. "I told you I'd be fine on my own. I'll look out for myself." Damien put his bag next to the couch and turned to gaze at her with anger. "I know, but I don't want to take a chance. The last time I left for a few days, you almost died in a hospital." He paused and took a long breath as if to shake off the awful memory, and then his face brightened up with the following words. "So I made the decision to take care of your health myself." Lena said, "So you're saying you're my nurse now?" Damien's kind demeanor struck her heart, just like it usually did. "That's right," he said with a grin. "Now, let's make you some chicken broth." Kellen couldn't help but yell in anger, "What do you mean you sent the divorce papers to my lawyer? How could you do that without asking me?" In front of him, his mother trembled with intense sobbing. But he was over it and knew how to keep his rage in check. He couldn't hang on because he was afraid he would lose his mind if he did. The earth beneath his feet was swiftly sliding away. "Lena gave them to me at the engagement party before she left." Celeste said, breathing through her mouth and felt very powerless. "I didn't know the truth yet, and neither did you. So I called your manager and had the papers sent right away." "God," Kellen growled, cutting in. He didn't want to hear any more, so he turned around and stormed out of the room. This was awful. He was in hell, and it appeared like the devil was punishing him in the ways that he thought were best. He was stuck in a maze that he couldn't get out of, and every bad thing he had done in the past was coming back to hit him. He didn't stop until he was outside, beneath the broad sky. He fell down on a bench beside the sidewalk, his pulse racing as shackles tightened around it. He clenched his eyes tightly as he realized that there was only one path anymore, and that way could never be without Lena. "Yes, that's why I left Felden," Damien responded, peeling carrots and chopping them into 2-inch pieces. "And it worked. Red Colt has agreed to give us the fabrics, but we still need to make the final deal. I needed to talk to you about my plan first, and we need to hire people who know how to design and tailor clothes." Lena grinned from the kitchen table as she watched him work like an expert at her kitchen counter. "You didn't have to wait. You could have finished everything right then and there." He put a tiny whole chicken neck, carrots, stalk celery, onion, and parsley in a sauce pot. "I wanted to. You're my partner, Lena, and I value what you think about my choices." Of course, he made her feel wanted again, just as he usually does. And from the first time, she opened her eyes and saw him. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" After a long, comfortable pause, she said, pleased with how well he cooked as if he had created cooking himself. "From my mother," he said, turning to offer her a sheepish look after adding enough water to cover the chicken and setting the pot on the heat. "She's a one-of-a-kind parent, I swear. When we were kids, she used to say, if women don't become like men and men don't like women, and both like each other, then the world can never be a happy and peaceful place. She taught my older sister karate so she wouldn't become a damsel, and she taught me how to cook so I could always take care of my better half." He scratched his head and smiled sheepishly. Lena was amazed in the best way possible. She smiled widely, showing that she was impressed. "I swear I love your mother already, Damien, even though I haven't met her yet." Damien smiled. "I'll bet my last penny that she would love you too." He turned his attention to the soup, which was now boiling, and started to skim the foam from the top. He also talked about the recipe and what he was doing to make the broth taste great. Lena paid close attention and decided right away that she would make the soup for all the sick and malnourished youngsters they had brought to Gwen's when she got better. She thought about Gwen's and remembered that there was going to be a brunch there shortly. She had intended to bake pies for it and then help the sisters with other things, but now she felt it might be a bit hard to do all of that. Damien, who had taken it upon himself to be her nurse and cook, and the cleaning was going to be a big problem. She was trying to figure out how to make the obstacle less hard without damaging it when her phone rang. Damien remarked, "I bet it's Lola," looking over his shoulder. He laughed. "She might be calling to tell you that she killed Ryan with that stupid pocket knife she always has with her." Yes, that was a stretch. But Lena knew she wouldn't be too astonished if it did happen. But it turned out that the call came from a number she didn't know. And when she picked it up, the other side was completely quiet. "Hello," she said again, but there was still no answer. "Who's there?" No one talked, though. She heard someone sigh a second later. It was a long, deep inhale that meant something. She felt uneasy in the pit of her stomach. She hung up right away with a grimace. She believed it was an incorrect number or a hoax call, but was it really? The news that this company is going under has spread like wildfire. "We're having trouble with the shareholders, our ratings have dropped, and employees are causing chaos. And you want an invitation to an orphanage's brunch?" Kellen said yes to his boss. He was staring outside the glass barrier. The streets and buildings of Felden seemed like they were about to eat him alive. He heard his boss let out a dejected sigh and leave. He put his fingertip on the vein that was pulsing under the skin of his temple. He knew he was standing on the brink, barely an inch away from losing everything, and that scared him even more. He shut his eyes and saw Lena's face. Smiling, gleaming, sobbing, and going away because they couldn't stand to see him. His eyes hurt under the lids that were closing. He was offered the choice of saving and keeping only one thing out of all the things he was about to lose. He would pick her without even thinking about it. He was doing precisely that right now, which is what he should have been doing from the start while he still had time. "I can't stand looking at your face anymore. You make me sick." Lena felt like she was crying non-stop and simply wanted to get away from the horrible feeling. But she couldn't move since her feet were stuck to the earth due to their own weight. And then, in the blink of an eye, just when she believed she would be locked in this horrible moment for the rest of her life, thin air pulled her out of it. She was sprinting along a desolate road, and the blackness around her was deeper than any night could provide. At that point, she didn't know anything except that she was scared something incredibly horrible was about to happen and that the only way to get away from it was to keep running. But suddenly, out of nowhere, a car hit her with its hood with a lot of power. She could feel her bones shattering, her head shaking, and all of her organs moving about inside her. The ache that hit her suddenly was too much to handle. She was lying on the ground and couldn't move any of her limbs. She could feel her eyes starting to shut, which she knew was a sign of something far worse. She had to keep her eyes open. She had to keep her eyes open no matter what. But her eyelids felt like they were made of lead. And her baby was sobbing close by. She had to save the baby. But she couldn't move or keep her eyes open anymore. A soft voice broke through her suffering and said, "Lena! Lena! Sweetie, wake up! Sweetheart, it's just a dream. Open your eyes." SHH, as she gently woke up from the harsh nightmare and the prison of sleep, she realized she was still crying because she felt so sad and weak. When she opened her eyes, she could only see Damien's face in a fuzzy way. "That's it," he murmured, letting out a breath of relief. "It's okay." She was out of breath and lifted a shaking hand to wipe away as many tears as she could. Her cries turned into hiccups. "Do you still have those nightmares?" Damien inquired, taking his hands off her shoulders now that she was awake and calm. Damien was the only one who knew about her dreams that happened again and over again. After all, she had been living with him for months after he picked her up wounded and hurt off the street. "Often," she said, her voice husky. "They wouldn't attack her every night anymore, but they would regularly do it after becoming weary of hiding behind the corner. But they still do, don't they? A lot of the time. I've accepted long ago that they've become a part of my life," she remarked, her voice thick with emotion. He was seated on the side of the bed, hovering over her as she lay there. The lamp post outside the window gave her bedroom a dull light. It cast shadows on his face, making the wrinkles of worry on his forehead and around his brown eyes look even worse. His eyes were quite interesting. In the daytime, they appeared black, but she had noticed that if he was weary or drowsy, they would change color to a lighter shade of brown that was hard to see. "I hope the counselor Dr. Robert has chosen for you will help," he said. "We'll find out tomorrow," she said, blinking her eyelids, which were heavy with sleep. She had 2 appointments at the hospital tomorrow, one after the other. First, she saw Dr. Robert, who would check on how she was healing. Then, she saw a psychiatrist whose name she couldn't recall just now. It didn't matter, she was confident Damien would remember. He was keeping track of everything for her these days, like when she needed to take her medicine, what foods she could eat, where she had placed her bandana, her doctor's appointments, and the fact that she shouldn't take too long baths in case she became sick. He took his job as her nurse very seriously. His soft voice murmured into the stillness of the room, "Everything will be fine, Lena. You'll see." She grinned. And that smile quickly faded into a look of hope on her face. But was there really a solution to get rid of these bad dreams? Or the memories? And the most crucial question was whether or not she even wanted to at this time. There is something bad about melancholy. At first, it seems awful, but after a while, night after night, and then for months and years, people start to like it in a very strange, sick manner. It means more than any enjoyment, and with time, it becomes something to treasure and dream about. I only remember that one night with my baby, Damien, she said, her tongue thick with sleep, yet it was more soothing to talk to him right now. I don't have any more. It wasn't about what he thought of her ailing state or what he said about the constant mention of her night of sorrow and loss. It was more about her letting everything out to someone she knew would never condemn her. Was she selfish? Yes, maybe she truly was. And you're stuck between wanting to forget and cherish it, he expressed what no one else had uttered. She only sent out a quiet breath as an answer. It's going to be okay, Lena, he stated, this time with more force. You'll see. She opened her eyes just a little bit. She wanted to know, how can you be so sure? She needed to hear it again so she could believe it. She knew what he would say since he had said it many times before. I believe in fate, and I believe in you, he said, and he looked as serious as he spoke. You'll be okay. She shut her eyes, and this time, the grin on her lips lasted. Why couldn't Kellen ever say this to her? What made it such that they were condemned to die this way? She heard shuffling sounds and knew that Damien was getting up and getting ready to go for his own bed, which was the living room's improvised couch bed. Damien, she yelled. Well, stay. He biography of the author. She could only feel him slip into the bed with her eyes closed. For modesty's sake, he laid on top of the cover. Damien, you'll freeze. You can get into the comforter. I know you wouldn't take advantage of me. But what if you take advantage of me instead? She smiled at the sound of his mischievous voice. I'm too hot, Lena Bird, go to sleep, he said with a hoarse laugh. She did, though. And the remainder of the night was free of nightmares. The sensation of safety may bring about amazing things. Lena woke up in the morning and saw that the space next to her was empty. His quiet voice emanating from the living room told me he was on the phone. She made the decision that she needed to send him to work today. He had been her shadow in the flat for 2 days. It was evident that it couldn't go on forever. He needed to focus on his new business since the shops needed him severely. Lola couldn't handle everything by herself, though. Lena was afraid that, at some time, she might stab someone in the eye with her pocket knife. When Lena or Damien were there, Lola's wrath or annoyance was one thing, but when they weren't, it was a whole other thing. Lena stood up in bed, pushing the covers away. She gasped when her back broke, and her vision started to swirl out of control. She promptly closed her eyes and waited for the dizziness to go away, which had been a normal thing for her since the operation. Any quick movement was too much for her brain, and she had to physically hold her breath to keep from falling face first to the floor. Slowly, she walked to the bathroom and locked the door. Then she turned to gaze in the mirror. And she looked at the person she had turned into. There was a woman in front of her who had no hair on her head. Her cheeks were sunken, her jaw stuck out sharply, and her eyes looked horrible because they were so deep in their sockets. She looked like a bald joke that didn't make sense. She shuddered and thought about how Damien could even look at her without laughing. The loud sound of a fist hitting the bathroom door woke her up from her bad thoughts. As she sprang, the toothbrush in her still hand dropped to the tiled floor. "Stop staring at the mirror, Lena. Breakfast is waiting for you at the table." Her eyes became bigger. How did he find out? How did he always know? She was positive that there was no hole in the door and that there were no cameras or anything like that in her bathroom. Also, Damien wasn't the kind to be a peeping Tom. So how could he have known that for the last 2 mornings, she had secretly stared at herself in the bathroom mirror and hated what she saw? Damien was already at the tiny kitchen table when she stepped out of the bathroom after completing her morning routine. There was already a chair moved back in front of him. She walked and sat down on it, happy to see food. Tea, oats, and toast. As she got stronger every day, owing to Damien's never-ending patience and drive, she also started to taste things again. She could eat more now without him having to push her. "You don't have to wear that bandana when you're home, Lena. Let your skin breathe a little. It's not even that cold today," he said, looking up at her head while he stuffed his lips with bread. Lena's hand went up to touch the bandana without her meaning to. She did her best to disguise how uncomfortable she was. But of course, Damien was a mind reader these days, so he saw it and sighed, then dropped the half-eaten bread on his plate. He added angrily, "If you're worried about what I would think if I saw you bald, you should know that it doesn't matter to me. You still look as beautiful as you did before." Lena sat up straight in her chair and shook her head. "You call this," she said, pointing to her body, "beautiful? Right now, I'm a hairless skeleton, Damien. Remember," he added, leaning in. "I've seen you at your worst, and I've memorized your beauty through every scar. A bald head or less flesh on your body won't make me forget it." She had a lot of scars in her heart, and he knew about all of them. As she learned more and more, she could clearly remember how he had been the buddy who had saved her life over and over again in more ways than she could count. Before she could even think about what he said, he leaned forward and untied the knot on her bandana with his long, skinny arms. When he pulled, the bandana slid off, and she couldn't breathe. She watched his black eyes go a little brighter as she glanced up at him. It was brown now, and her reflection shone in the strong beams of sun coming in through the kitchen window. She had a fresh thought. It might be that the change in the hue of his eyes had nothing to do with being tired or drowsy. Instead, it could have been the feelings he was having. Strong feelings that made his eyes light up while he worked to make her life better all the time. Both of them jumped a little when her phone rang. Damien cleared his throat, rose up, and started to pick up the cups and plates from the table. She snatched up the phone with one hand and grasped his wrist with the other. The number was not known. "Let me wash," she said with her mouth. In response, he looked at her in disbelief. She softly huffed as he carried the dishes to the sink. She grimaced when she didn't hear anything on the other end of the phone. She had been getting calls like this for 2 days, and she was starting to feel uncomfortable. At this point, call blocking wouldn't work because the numbers would change every time. She didn't bother to say hello since she knew what was about to happen. And, as predicted, a sigh came. It was loud enough for her to know it was genuine, yet quiet enough that she couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. She hung up the phone with a grimace still on her face. Damien was humming a melody that caught her interest. She gazed at the back of his head. part of her wanted to tell him about the phone calls, but the other part didn't. Because she knew he would just grow more upset. The guy was already worried about her health. It's not a big deal, she murmured while taking big breaths. Just a foolish person making scary hoax calls. That's all. The next day, she decided she was done with doing nothing but eating and sleeping all day. That, too, while Damien performed all the housework for her. She was strong enough to act like a normal person and do some job now. She got down at her workstation with papers and sketch pencils and started coming up with clothing designs and ideas that she thought would work well for their new business. It was hard to convince Damien that she was really okay, though. In the end, he persisted in hanging over her with determination. She knew that he was checking to see if she was throwing up blood and fainting on the papers, no matter how much he appeared to be just staring at her drawing patterns. Yes, it was frustrating that he was making such a big deal out of it. But she was also thankful for it since she loved that someone cared about her so much. I'm really okay, Damien, really, she responded. It's therapeutic to draw new designs. It feels good to finally use my fashion design degree in a useful way. But you will stop when you're tired, okay? She said, agreeing. After that, she moved away from her desk and looked at him with a serious face. Damien, you need to start going to the boutiques. If you keep avoiding it for too long, our new business will not go well. The video calls and emails are just not enough, you need to be there in person to make sure everything goes well. And don't try to deny it, she scolded when he tried to deny it. I don't need someone to watch me all the time, I'm fine. Okay, he said with a sigh of defeat. I'll start going to work, but not until tomorrow. We still have to see your doctors today. She grinned because she had won. Kellen was well hidden behind the huge pile of flowers in the florist's store. In front of his face, there was a space between two big dahlias that gave him a good view of the hospital across the street. There was a bee buzzing about him. He smacked the object away when it got too near, but he was too scared to look anywhere else. There, with Damien's aid, Lena got out of the automobile. Kellen's hands turned into tight fists next to him. She smiled at Damien and appeared joyful, even though she still looked weak. Damien moved in to adjust the bandana that had slipped down to her eyebrows before they could go. They said no to the wheelchair that the staff provided, and then they went away. Damien had his arm protectively over her shoulder, and she leaned into him, appearing as comfortable as she could. He let all the bad sentiments out of his chest with a deep sigh that rocked the dahlias in front of him. Was he going to lose Lena? Not that he had her anymore. And could he blame her? No. He had already done enough of it. He had driven her toward it, no matter where she was now. The outside world could have worked together to make it happen, but he was too humiliated to say that he had taken the chance with both hands and so eagerly. It is the worst thing that can happen to possessive individuals. In their haze of claiming their domain, they frequently smother and destroy the most priceless object they had always wanted to guard. When Lena was totally out of sight, and his heart stopped racing, the ringing in his pocket started again. He left the flower store without paying attention to the florist, who was giving him a dirty look. The florist was sure to get angry after the man stood in that small space for hours, asking random questions about flowers, getting in the way of other customers as they picked flowers, and then leaving without buying a single petal. He walked to his car, which was parked on the curb. He picked up the phone with one hand while putting the other in his pocket. Got an invite to Gwen's home brunch, but I had to promise to give something in return, his boss said from the other side. He murmured, "That's good," and his lips twitched into a smile. "How can it be good, sir?" The manager's voice was full of fear. "Some of the investors want their money back, and most of our worried employees are quitting." At this point, charity sounds like a saw blade that will kill you. Kellen interrupted and said, "How many sports cars do I have in Brooklyn?" "Sir, make plans so that I can sell them all." Nothing else mattered. His money, his business, his stupid cars and watches, and his mansion. Nothing, and I mean nothing, could bring back what he had lost in his craziness. He looked at the floral store one final time before getting into the automobile. He saw brilliant, fresh lilies. He turned away, his eyes stinging with tears as he remembered the last time he was turned down and was ready for more pain. "Yo, Lena, look at my masterpiece," Lola remarked, brimming with enthusiasm and pride as she held out the toy she had crafted. "It's an owl," Lena said, looking at the toy blankly. "Good job figuring it out." Selini's shoulders drooped. "You told me to make them look real." Lena groaned deeply and rubbed her forehead. Her bandana slipped a little from where it was supposed to be, but she had more important things to worry about, like making sure that the toys they were stitching together to sell as fundraisers and other homemade items didn't have body parts that were controversial. "Yes," Lena said, throwing her hands up. "Realistic, like, not putting a third or fourth eye on a stick figure's forehead. You scared little Nancy, the poor girl." "Have you ever not seen Colin Harper, Lena? You know, his half-brother." Lola was becoming angry now as she cut a piece of material into a spherical shape. Lena hoped they weren't anything. Lena said, "That's it, Lola. Don't be silly, Lena. I'm also making them pants and camis." "No," she said in a hard voice, with her eyes set. "Fine, you win. I lose." Lena was happy, so she turned back to put the threaded needle into her own toy, which was a really lovely giraffe. They were in Gwen's house, sitting on a mat on the floor. Getting ready for the brunch celebration on Monday was in full swing. Lola and Lena worked hard on the things they were greatest at here, such as making toys and table mats for the home. Some of the sisters were preparing crafts, while others were in the kitchen baking cupcakes. There were also a lot of volunteers, like Lola and Lena, who came out of love for the kids. Damien had dropped them off in the morning and then gone to work, leaving Lola in charge of Lena. Damien had eased down a little about his nurse duties after his previous appointment with Dr. Robert when he was told that she was doing better. Lena was thankful. The guy had been spending practically all of his days following her, ignoring his business and his own life. She would have to go through a week of radiation to get rid of the rest of the tumor tissues in her brain that were still there after the operation. Dr. Robert had said that he thought that would be the end of her illness, at least until it came back, which they were assured was not unusual. Lena was happy for now that she would be getting rid of the tumor very soon. Even her visit with the psychiatrist, Dr. Bistro, was unexpectedly helpful. Lena found it quite simple to talk about her nightmares and the sadness that had previously made her want to die more than anything else. The man was ancient and had a twinkle of peace and friendliness in his eyes that were getting smaller and smaller. When she stepped out of his cabin, she was attracted by the sense of a wonderful kind of emptiness within. Lola remarked, "Are you going to faint?" as Lena bid farewell to Dave and the other youngsters in the hall. The sisters were putting away the handcrafted goods in boxes. Lena turned and frowned at Lola. "Why should I?" Lola shrugged, lifted her arms, and rolled her wrists. Her face crunched as she heard a few little cracks. "You look like you're really tired." Lena hit Lola's arm and said in a sing-song voice, "Same to you." They strolled across the big, grassy front yard of the orphanage where the brunch would be hosted. There was only one day left till the big event. Teenagers from nearby schools and some guys from the area were busy building up a stage on one side of the grass near the ancient oak trees. Seeing all these individuals of all ages and social classes come together for the same reason to support these kids really broke my heart. Lola was standing on the curb and mumbling to herself in irritation. They had asked for a cab around half an hour ago, but it still hadn't arrived. But it wasn't odd for a cab to show up this late in the city. Some drivers like to show up late to seem cool. No one has yet figured out why this person was acting this way. Lola said, "We should have said yes when Damien offered to send his office car for the day, like always. But no, you had to point out that we weren't doing office work and blah blah blah. There's just too many mosquitoes here, and I'm wearing a maxi dress. Those nasty bloodsuckers are all partying inside." Lena could really see Lola moving about like a crazy person. Lena thanked the heavens that she was wearing trousers. "Why don't you take a walk?" she advised. Lola lifted the dress to her knees and stomped away angrily, screaming, "I was thinking just that." Lena groaned and waited patiently at the curb. She could have walked home, which wasn't too far, but she still hadn't gotten back to full strength. It would be really unjust to physically fall to her knees on the way home and make her pals even more worried. They had already done a lot for her. The sky was gloomy at the time, and the wind was blowing in a strange way on a hot day, which was nice. The cricket bugs on the shrubs and trees behind her kept squeaking in time. If you listen closely, the insect's song might make you feel dizzy. She was tapping her foot on the ground and looking at Lola, who was still stomping and pulling her dress away, about 15 feet away. When she heard a vehicle squeal, she turned her gaze to the road. There was their cab. It was moving slowly toward the side of the road to pull over. She took a step forward, smiled, and yelled for Lola at the same time. There were also screeching sounds coming from the other side of the street. The difference was that it was 10 times louder and sounded really scary as it quickly drifted closer. Instinctively, she jerked her head towards the sounds. She was scared and shocked when she saw a truck coming straight toward her at a crazy, diabolical speed. People were screaming all around her, but her gaze was glued to the metal monster. She remembered a time when a car almost hit her in the same way, and it was the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to her. The taxi driver's angry obscenities and Lola's ear-piercing cries faded into the background. But suddenly, someone yelled Lena, practically in her ear and grabbed her arm, pulling her out of the way of the truck in a way that wasn't very kind. She gasped as she saw the quick movement, and the next thing she knew, she was slamming into a body that struck the ground with a scream of its own, bringing her down with it. She was out of breath, and so was the person who had pulled her out of the way of death. She understood that he had intentionally softened her fall with his own body, which was now resting beneath her. She blinked a few times to clear the dots in front of her eyes as she raised her head. As she focused her eyes, she saw that the face looking back at her was not one she had seen before. Kellen was it. And much like hers, his heart was pounding in his chest. His face was as white with fear as hers was. He moved them both about to straighten them up, and she sat up, feeling like her world was a little off balance. The vehicle screeched angrily and turned toward the road, then sped away. The bastard ran away. Kellen swore, shivering. She couldn't tell if it was from anger or terror. Lena was still a little dizzy as she watched the gently settling cloud of dust that the truck had left behind. Kellen looked at her with worried eyes. He questioned, "Are you okay?" while breathing heavily and wrapping one of his arms around her shoulder to keep her at his side. Lena murmured, "Yes," as she came out of her daze. At that moment, her body became aware of how close they were to each other. She could feel his muscles pressing against her and his strong grip around her shoulders, holding her stable while her knees shook at the stench of death that was so close again. She was starting to wriggle out of his arms, but he didn't seem to notice or want to let her go. Lola was strong enough to pull her away from Kellen, which was a good thing. "Oh my God! Lena!" Lola yelled, making Lena jump. She hugged Lena so tightly that it hurt her bones, then let her go just as soon, keeping her at arm's length. "Let me see how many bones have broken," Lola murmured, looking down at her body. "At this rate, you're going to be the most broken person in the whole world." Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.